Ladies and gentlemen, from the Parsons production studio, we have yet another problem. Behind you, you can see my 2013 Subaru BRZ. She currently is having a slight issue. What issue, may you ask? Well, take a look. Now, to help better understand this situation, I have zero clue what possibly could be wrong. At first, I thought perhaps my clutch went out, but I drove my car home completely fine. It has been sitting here for approximately 2 months, and I have been riding the motorcycle, rain or shine, to get to places. There's also a few other vehicles here that I've been driving. However, the BRZ is down, and she needs our help. We need to figure out what is wrong with this BRZ ASAP to get her going back on the road as quickly as possible. Let's dive into what it possibly could be. Okay, the BRZ is officially in the air. Let's go ahead and take a peek underneath. I had to actually move the car away from the workbench a little bit, and so when I started it up, she was not happy. She did not want to go into reverse, and I can definitely tell that there is some sort of clutch issue. It also wanted to die a lot too. It might be because it hasn't been started in 2 months. I don't know. Let's take a peek. Well, I can't see much with all those cover plates. So looks like we have to take some cover plates off and get to work here. Okay, in order to get this cover plate off for the transmission, there are about 1 million 10mm bolts. So let's go ahead and remove all those. Well, folks, we have a slight problem. You can see that somebody who wasn't paying attention hit something. I don't know who that would have been. There's some bolts here that are ground down. That's my socket's not fitting over. So we're gonna have some nifty tricks to get these ones off. Let's see what we can do. Now that the under tray has been removed, it is now time to remove the exhaust, then the drive shaft, and then the transmission. Let's get exhausted with the exhaust. Okay, Parsons Productions fans, it is now the next day. As of right now, we have the under tray out, as well as the front pipe. My over pipe is still in the car. This was incredibly hard to get out because one of the bolts got stripped. I don't know, who would strip a bolt? Gosh. I ended up having to cut it. You can see some cut marks on there. I'm not super stoked about that. I may have to replace the over pipe just because of those threads stuck in there. Anyway, going back underneath the car, you can see we now have clear access to the transmission. I believe my next step will be to remove the drive shaft from the transmission and then slowly work on unbolting the transmission bell housing from the block. I have a transmission jack, and we'll jack up the transmission jack and slowly move the transmission down to see what kind of damage is underneath that bell housing. Okay, so front drive shaft has been removed. We also have the rear portion of the drive shaft removed, and that leaves us access to the transmission. Grab my lights. There are a number of bolts to remove this. I'm going to need to disconnect my reverse lockout on the inside of the car. I'll also have to remove this rear transmission mount, as well as the bell housing mounts. There's a bunch of bolts around there. I believe I do have to remove the starter as well too, and it's gonna be a lot of bolts. So let's get removing bolts. Hopefully they don't strip. Alrighty, we are almost ready to drop the transmission. If anyone is curious on how to remove a reverse lockout on a BRZ or something similar, it is insanely ridiculous. So here's the reverse lockout, and here is a little pin. This pin is the size of a 3/32 punch. Put your car in reverse, then take a 3/32 size punch and hammer the crap out of it. When you hammer it, a lot of wiggling is gonna be going on. So what I did is I took an electrical box, wrapped it in a bunch of cloths, and then just smacked the crap out of it, and then this little pin came out. That was really difficult, so if anyone needs to know how to do that, that's how to do that. I looked it up on the internet, and it seemed like everyone was doing that. So now with the shift linkage itself disconnected, we can go in here, remove this center bezel piece, and the transmission should fall out once we get the jack on it. I've got all the bolts below all loosened up, so now it should be time to just go ahead and put the transmission jack right underneath it and drop the old girl out. Let's see how that goes. Brand new transmission jack, all complete. Now I'm going to roll this underneath there and loop the strap around the transmission, unbolt each bolt with this fully jacked up, and then slowly lower the transmission. Okay, so now with the transmission jack fully secured, I'm gonna go ahead and loosen the bolts all around the bell housing, and then I'll loosen the bolts down here for the rear transmission mounts. Theoretically, we should just be able to back it out 3 or 4 inches, and then downsy woundsy. Should be fun. You know, it was very much worth it spending $120 on 6-ton jack stands, because 5 inches doesn't sound like much, but when you know it's the motion of the ocean, everything makes a difference. What? You get this much room, you get 5 more inches under here, that's a lot. And all these wires and crap are in the way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this right here is the BRZ transmission. And if you take a quick peek, you can see it's like every other transmission removal. A little bit of a mess. I decided to not drain the transmission, which probably would have been best. But here's our culprit. This right here is called a throwout bearing or a release bearing. Either name is correct. But this one decided to commit suicide. You can see the parts of it are everywhere. I removed a lot of parts from it, but this one is El Dunzo, and it's gonna need to be replaced. While we have the transmission out, we're gonna go ahead and replace the clutch and pressure plate as well, the rear main seal, and there's a few other little parts on this transmission that are starting to leak, so a few little gaskets here and there will be needed replaced. Now it's time to order a ton of parts for this, and BRZ is gonna stay on some jack stands for a while. Hopefully we'll be back up and running real soon. Hopefully we'll see you about a month-ish. Alrighty, so it has been roughly 3 or 4 days. Been waiting for some parts to arrive, but in the meantime, what we can do is start polishing up this monstrosity. So from research I've done online, apparently this clutch fork here is very much prone to snapping right here in the center, which is interesting. I've never seen a clutch fork snap. And the replacement one for this is roughly $15 or so. That's how much a clutch fork should be. They sell a billet version or an upgraded version for significantly more. You know, I really don't want to do this job again, so I went out and I purchased the upgraded version, and it's forged, so hopefully it shouldn't snap in half. Now this one isn't cracked, it's just fine actually. We can actually remove that. I want to be careful with these clips. But when we remove this, we'll remove it and it'll slide out of here. And I also ordered the new pivot bearing that's right behind this, and this thing just kind of moves back and forth like so. But our first step in order to replace and repair all this is to clean up all this disaster. So let's get to that. You can see all the throwout bearing disaster in here. That's probably why my car was making crazy amounts of smoke. This thing is just done. I am very, very glad I pulled this apart. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taking it down with some degreaser and let this thing soak a bit. Take a little wire brush and just go to town and make sure this thing's nice and clean. I do have a little bit of end play or shaft play here on the input shaft. I'm not gonna do anything about that. It's kind of hard to do something about that, maybe in the future. Okay, so next on the back end of the transmission, you can see that this area is all covered in transmission fluid. Now, what could that possibly be from? Well, this seal at the rear end, or the output shaft of the transmission, I believe is the culprit. So what I did is purchased a replacement seal. This should fit in there. The one other seal I would like to replace is this seal right here. I don't quite know if I'll be able to get to that one. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna clean up this rear end and we will try to replace that rear seal. So I've got the transmission up on the jack, got the brush supporting this arm coming out here. I've got my replacement seal here, and it's always important to check the size and make sure that the size is accurate, and that one looks like it lines up well. It'll actually be fitting like that with this side facing outwards. I'm gonna try to carefully remove this. So I got my seal puller here. I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can try to remove that. Okay, well it took some doing, but I finally got the seal out. So what I was able to do is I took my screwdriver and my hammer and I marred up the end enough. Then I took my seal removal tool and kind of wedged it in there and pulled it out. I don't think it mangled up anything in here, so it all looks good. And now I can install my new seal. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my new seal and I'm going to gently press it in just like so. And remember, the cup portion goes into the transmission. Now what you might do is take the old seal and use it as something to press in the new seal. Try to get it symmetrical as possible here. The rear seal is now fully seated. That actually was a little trickier than I anticipated. To recap, here's the old leaky seal that's all mangled now from me trying to pull it out. And here's the new fresh one. What would have been great to have is a large socket that was the diameter of this seal and gently tap it in. You don't own a socket that large. So what I did is I took the butt end of a screwdriver and I put it on there so it wasn't gonna damage it, and then I hammered it reverse style. Normally it's like that, but I reversed it like that. So it was a nice gentle edge, and I just went slowly around until it was a nice firm seal all around. It feels like it's pretty much in there. So our next step is going to be working on the actual clutch. Let's jump into that. Alrighty folks, from underneath my car, here we have the stock clutch. Our plan is to remove the whole clutch assembly as well as the flywheel. I have a replacement set for everything. And you can even see here how much the throwout bearing has overheated the pressure plate. And you can see those marks on there, not good looking. So we're just gonna replace everything and clean this whole area up. So let's get to it. You can see there's a set of 12mm bolts. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those. And then the whole pressure plate and clutch assembly should come off. So there's the flywheel. It's all marred up. Let's get that off. Set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 14mm bolts. I've got my screwdriver in here holding the flywheel in place so it doesn't move. Let's get that off. So now the flywheel should be able to come off now that those bolts are removed. Oh, this thing's heavy. Here's my rear main seal. That seal actually looks really intact. I hope I don't mess anything up by replacing that. Parsons Productions fans, I apologize for the poor camera angles. Working under the BRZ here is definitely not easy. I was able to get more height off of these taller jack stands, but it's still a little bit of a difficult process getting a decent camera angle under there. However, we have this. Right here is an old pressure plate, and you can see it's a little bit heat warped from the old throwout bearing. We have my old clutch, which honestly, the clutch and flywheel weren't all that in that bad of shape. They could have gone for a lot longer. However, since we have the transmission out, it's wise to do this job anyway. Here we have a brand new clutch from Clutch Max, which is an eBay special. Who else? I've never had problems with eBay parts. They've all worked very, very well. I'm not sponsoring them or anything, but they've all worked great. This is almost an identical clutch. It advertises this as a stage 1 clutch. They had the exact same clutch in a stage 2 or stage 3. And you're really not gonna get that much difference in protection from a eBay special stage 3 clutch. If you really want the big horsepower number clutches, then I'd recommend purchasing from a reputable brand. And we have my reduced chrome ollie flywheel. This flywheel is so much lighter compared to the OEM one. This thing is massively heavy. I want to get a scale out and see the difference, because this thing weighs a bloody ton compared to the new and improved one. So here's all of our parts. Let's get them installed in the BRZ. One thing I did not mention is this rear main seal. Now the seal on the BRZ looks to be in decent shape. However, when you're replacing all these parts, it is a really good idea to replace that rear main seal just in case anything were to happen down the road. So we are gonna install this, and it's a little tricky. However, I will walk you through the process. So once again, I apologize for the poor camera angles here. However, this is the rear main seal. That little rubber piece all along. Now, as you can see, mine looks to be in pretty good shape, but we're gonna replace it anyway. Rear main seal out. Let's go. Looking good, BRZ, looking good indeed. The rear main seal is officially out. What I ended up doing was I screwed a screw into it, and that created a little lip where I was able to pull it out. So now we can go ahead and replace our new seal. But before we do that, we are gonna put some grease all around it just to make sure there are no leaks. Hello folks, and welcome back to yet another episode of Parsons Productions. Episode 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, or 8, or 9, or 10 of the Subaru BRZ clutch slash throw-up bearing slash short shifter project. In today's episode, we have some very exciting parts to install. I believe, don't quote me, but I believe all the parts that we have ordered for this project have arrived. Let's go review our inventory. So first things first, here is what we have. This entire parts table is everything we need. So you are familiar with, in the last episode, we have the old flywheel, the old rear main seal, the old clutch, as well as the old pressure plate. Down here, which I've already showed you, we have our brand new pressure plate, clutch, and flywheel. Here in this box, we have just about 600 to 700 of those little silly plastic fastener type deals. Because I don't know why, but this car is missing way too many. It needs a lot. So instead of buying just individual little parts, we bought a whole large, oh, it even says right there, 620 pieces. Next, we have a brand new billet steel pivot bearing. This right here is the transmission, and this right here is called a pivot bearing. This pivot bearing is what the clutch fork itself bounces off of. This right here, you can see that little dimple is where that balances. And these aren't a part that you really need to replace, but they do get a little worn out. So this is a billet one that should last a lot longer, and it'll be real nice. Wasn't too much, it was like $4 or $5, so why not? Next up on the list, we have a short shifter. Now, I was not planning on installing this. Over this right here is my old OEM reverse lockout portion of the gear shifter. It has these little plastic sleeves. Now there should be 2 of these, and I have zero clue what happened to the second one. I couldn't find this little plastic sleeve anywhere online. And I had this other steel one, an aluminum one, which looks way better and feels a lot nicer, and I was gonna install that one. But since I didn't have this little plastic thing and I couldn't find it anywhere online, this was cheap enough and I was going to install it anyway. I figured, why not now? This is the Megan Racing short shifter for the 2013 Subaru BRZ. It also works for the 2020 models, and it comes with a transmission mounting plate for the rear. I believe this one is polyurethane, which should work a lot nicer. So we can install that later today. Last but not least up on the list is a Versus Engineering clutch fork. So apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently on the Subaru BRZ transmissions, this clutch fork is very prone to cracking right about here when used heavily. I have zero problems with mine. Mine works just fine. However, this one is forged and it comes with a free sticker. That's good marketing right there. But this one is forged, and you can look at the difference. This one, forged steel. This one is just pressed steel, so it's definitely a lot more beefy, and it's not gonna break as easy. This part was way too expensive. I did not enjoy buying this, like, at all. I really hope this serves its purpose. But yeah, that's all the parts we have for today's install. The one other part I did end up purchasing is this little fella right here. I have tried installing this rear main seal so many times, and the rear main seal on the BRZ is notorious for falling inside the engine. And if you're not careful enough, you'll go through 3 of them like I did. So they sell this silly little tool, and it's way too expensive, but it's just a piece of aluminum, and you just bolt this up to your engine block, just like so, and that presses the rear main seal in nice and clean like. This thing was not worth the price I spent on it, but if it'll make the rear main seal go in any easier and stop having me buy rear main seals and going through them like used tissues, it'll be a lot easier. So first things first on the list, we're gonna get onto the car and we're gonna install this rear main seal, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Really far-fetched saying, so I'm gonna say it's not gonna work and hopefully it does work, but let's get to it. So here we have the end of the engine. Here we have the Company 23 rear main seal tool. You can see it lines up perfectly with the holes there. We're gonna take our rear main seal, lube it up really well with high temp lube, and then we're gonna place it right there, and then slowly crank down with the provided bolt. We'll set the camera up and we'll see how this goes. Okay, the rear main seal is just seated on there temporarily. Now we're gonna take our tool, slowly tighten it down. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to slowly tighten down all these bolts ever so gently, and that rear main seal will hopefully seat nice and flush, because the main problem is it just falls right back in way too far, and then once it falls in, you have to basically get a new seal because you ruined the old one. The tool is officially off, and you can see the rear main seal is seated quite nicely. Actually very impressed with that. I should have got that from the beginning. Feel a little silly. So now it's time to reinstall our crankshaft position sensor wheel. That's your crankshaft position sensor right there. And this wheel just spins around and tells you what position the crankshaft's in. Time to reinstall this, and then we can get the flywheel on, flywheel bolts, followed by the clutch and the pressure plate, and we'll be so wrapped up with this. Okay, we are now on to the flywheel. The flywheel comes with a bearing. This is called a flywheel bearing, and that goes right there. That bearing does need to be pressed into the flywheel. This is a great time to swap out your gloves because you don't want any grease on this. We'll be degreasing it with brake cleaner later. First of all, I do happen to own a press, so that is a great time to use the press. And we will be greasing up this bearing, and we'll slide it right in just so it fits like so. Because if you take a look at the old flywheel, there's a bearing right here, and that needs to be replaced, and it's pressed in, so we will press that bearing in. Okay, so I've greased the bearing up real nice. I've got a socket that's just the right size, right above it. And now it's time to gently press this all together. Okay, so this next step is rather important. This metal surface right here is what the clutch will stick to. Now, if there's any grease, oil, or debris on it or anything, it's gonna have a hard time sticking. So we wanna be rather methodical about this step. I'm gonna take some brake clean. Just gonna spray this down, and we're gonna wipe this down thoroughly. Like I said, no oils, foreign greases, or such should be on here. If we do, we'll have a very slippery clutch, and we don't want a slippery clutch. We want a nice and sticky clutch. The outside rings don't matter as much. However, oil and stuff on here in general should not be here. So we're just gonna make sure this is nice and clean before installing. Okay, for this next step, you'll need a torque wrench. We will be torquing these flywheel bolts down to 80 foot-pounds of torque. I'm gonna be putting a little bit of Loctite on these bolts just so they don't back out. I'm gonna get them all hand tight, and then we can come around the torque wrench and torque them down in a star pattern. I'm gonna first torque these down to 60 foot-pounds, and then I'm gonna come around one more time and do 80 foot-pounds. Our next step is going to be installing the clutch and flywheel. Your clutch kit should come with a alignment tool that looks something like this. You need to degrease the pressure plate one more time, as well as the backing plate to the pressure plate. We'll clean this surface all up once again, make it look really nice, and then we'll torque everything down. You're gonna wanna install your clutch just like so. And there's these little alignment pins, and it'll look something like that. You're going to be putting a tiny dab of Loctite on all of these bolts. And it's really important to keep that clutch alignment tool in until after the torquing process is all done. All right, now that all of our bolts are hand tight, we're gonna tighten them down to 26 foot-pounds in a star pattern. There's something about using a torque wrench that's just so satisfying. Okay, now that our clutch and pressure plate assembly are on, we can remove the alignment tool, and that should be aligned perfectly. Alrighty, so now outside the car, now that we've finally got our clutch and pressure plate, it is time to work on the transmission. Something I should have done a long time ago prior to removing this transmission out, because it caused me a world of headache, is removing the shift linkage mechanism. We will be installing the Megan Racing short shifter. In order to do that and make this transmission install a million times easier, we will be removing this portion. These two little clips right here on the side, all you have to do is twist them up and they slide out. There is a little cotter pin right here. You'll remove that like so. Slide this guy out and it'll come off just like so. Okay, taking our 19mm socket, we're gonna remove the old pivot bearing. There's the old one, is the new one. You can kind of see the difference here. Not too much, really. They're pretty much the same thing. This one's just forged and it's billet, so a little nicer. And put some thread locker on it, and then we'll torque it down. And then this gets torqued down at 12 foot-pounds, which is not very tight at all, but it's on there. These little clips right here on the side, we're gonna be reusing these clips, so we're gonna carefully disassemble this. This right here is what our new throwout bearing looks like. You can see it's nice and sturdy, no wobbles or anything. So we're gonna assemble this exactly how it was assembled on the old fork. It'll be sitting right about there and the pins will hold it in nice and easy like. And with these little clips, they're kind of funky, but go opposite of each other, just like that. And before we do that, we are gonna put a little bit of grease right here because these two ears are pivot points and those will be constantly rubbing. So we're just gonna grease those up a little bit. Then we'll also be greasing the back where this other spring clip is gonna be going. Now for the back, this right here is where it's gonna be pivoting, and then we'll just put a little bit of grease right in the hole here, just so it has nice smooth contact and pivots freely. But the fork is all ready to go here. We're just gonna slide this in, and that's just gonna click on right there. And when you depress the clutch, this moves in and out, back and forth. This is what separates the engine, or the pressure plate, from the drive train, aka your transmission. And that's a really important piece. Okay, Parsons Productions fans, the time has come. It is time to put this beast of a transmission with its brand new throwout bearing, as well as clutch fork, and the brand new bushing, which I just installed, back into the car with its brand new clutch. Our first step is to lower the transmission on the jack and lower it into the car. We're gonna need to raise the engine up just a little bit. We'll tilt it back, and then we'll bolt the bell housing bolts up, followed by the rear transmission mount, and then it should be good. Alrighty folks, I have all of the transmission bell housing bolts now in. Next it is time to mount our rear transmission mount bolts. I do need to torque each and every bolt and the studs down to 37 foot-pounds. So I'll do that after installing these, just to get everything nice and square and settled, and I can remove this jack. It is now time to install our Megan Racing short shifter. Like I said earlier, the only reason I'm installing this is because there's a little plastic piece on the OEM one that for some reason decided to disappear. So this is gonna be the solution to that. Like I said, it was cheap enough, so not gonna be really an issue. We're just gonna remove these 10mm bolts right here. We're gonna need this piece. This is our reverse lockouts piece. Then this should just remove like so. And there is the OEM shifter. The next one will slide in just like so. I will be greasing this up significantly before installing it, but it'll just sit right in there. This right here is your reverse. This one's a little on the grippy side, so I'm gonna throw some grease at it and just hope that fixes it. And then we're gonna throw the bolts in, and then we'll clean up the grease. And with the final piece all assembled, we're gonna go ahead and take our existing hardware that bolts in right here and throw it back underneath the car. From the Parsons production studio, everything on a BRZ is now back together, except for the under trays, which we can leave those off for just the initial test starts. Transmission took a lot of fluid, first of all, and it was way more than I was expecting. But anyways, everything's back on, exhaust is all on, so let's go ahead and give it a start, and let's see if those rear wheels spin. My clutch went straight to the floor. I think we might need to bleed this young lad. We need to bleed it, and then hopefully we should have a clutch. So a little bit of a issue. I had to disconnect the slave cylinder, so that let air into the line, letting the clutch stick up, stay down. Now that that's all taken care of, I think we're ready for a test drive. Are we ready for a test drive? Hopefully it doesn't break down. I am a little concerned about that rear main seal. Pretty sure I did it right, but there's always that chance that you didn't do it right. So let's get this car on the ground, move the Camaro, do a car shuffle, and take it for a test drive, even though it is dark. That's okay. You ready?
I'm ready.
Ready, Freddy. Let's do it. Okay, Parsons Productions fans, that wraps up this episode of the BRZ clutch install. I hope you enjoyed every bit of it as much as I did. I know it was exciting. You may notice the hood is now a different color, and that is just a little sneak peek on the next upgrade for this humble little BRZ. Thank you again for watching, and I'll catch y'all in the next episode.